Welcome to the webinar here for Vigilor, our new partner. As we've been looking at solutions for our members, Vigilor purchased Silera, which is our company that we were invested in ourselves, and we're now with the larger company Vigilor, which is part of Trimexta. And I want to introduce Todd Slade, Vigilor's cybersecurity sales leader, and he's going to go over the multi-services that Vigilor offers to our members at a wonderful and very affordable price. The nice thing about Vigilor, it's scalable, and they also understand rural medicine, into which they understand the one person shop. So Todd, welcome. I'll let you introduce your team, and then we will be able to record this, and then we'll have some questions as we go through. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks so much, Dennis. I appreciate everybody joining. Todd Slade, as Dennis mentioned, cybersecurity technical solution sales leader here at Vigilor. We are part of, as Dennis mentioned, a larger organization called Trimedics, and I'm going to go through some of those advantages that we hold in that dynamic of Vigilor being a brand of a large organization. With me, I've got Stacy Lee, Director of Marketing and Marketing Events, and also Aaron Horn, Solution Consultant for us here at Vigilor. So we're going to talk today about medical device cybersecurity, which is Vigilor's focus, and also incident response and how we're involved with that as well. Go ahead and skip that. It's yes, I'm bald. We'll move on from that. So we're going to go through some trends that we see out there that also are, statistically tracked. We'll go through the approach that we take with medical devices and how overall you prepare for an incident and be proactive. I think that's the big thing, especially in rural organizations, hospitals, and small systems. It's the cybersecurity I know is top of mind, and especially executives can't any longer ignore any part of their threat surface that they've got within the organization. We'll go through some benefits and outcomes of engaging with Vigilor, and then, happy to answer any questions at the end and also during. So please feel free to make it interactive. So I talked about getting into some trends that we see. So unfortunately, I've got personal experience with the talent shortage. I don't need to get into that, but this spans from not just cybersecurity professionals within IT, but also biomed, clinical engineering groups. Really, everybody's working with a skeleton crew all the way through to nurses, right? There's a lot of burnout going on. I think that started during COVID, and it's continued. The hospitals are trying to turn a profit, and there is some struggle there currently. So, the other challenge that we see are rising insurance premiums. And I think we all can say personally that, whether it's your car insurance, homeowners insurance, or, your cyber risk insurance, these premiums are through the roof right now, and they continue to rise. And they continue to rise based on, the amount of threats and amount of penetrated breaches within the U.S. So, I mentioned an increased amount. So for 14 years in a row, the healthcare has had the highest cost of breaches out of any other industry, which is approximately $10 million per breach. And that's actually a hard cost. So we'll get into some of the other, soft costs, and obviously there's opportunity costs, brand impact, things of that nature. So why prioritize medical device cybersecurity? This is, as I mentioned, I think still a blind spot in a lot of organizations, but it is getting a lot of attention now because it's gone unattended, I would say. So about 3/4 of overall of all healthcare organizations have at least half their medical devices connected to the internet. So, every new device coming out, a predominant amount of them are connectable. And whether they come on or off the wire, depends on usage and, maybe upgrading old systems, things of that nature. But the other piece of this too is 53 96% of medical devices within hospitals have known critical vulnerabilities. That's a massive amount. It's concerning, and it spans a large array of device make models and types. Um, Prior to 2024, attacks were rising at about 86% year over year. From 24 versus 2023, it rose 128%. We are in an accelerated environment, and I think the headlines in the news back that up as well. But things are accelerating, and it's even more concerning, which means you just have to start paying attention and addressing these things. So, average losses in total, it's of on top of the $10 million of that hard cost, just loss can be range anywhere from 15 to $100 million, and that scale kind of follows along with size of hospital or system. Just as an example, St. Margaret's Health in Illinois, they did have to shut down after a cyber attack, so their systems were down for months, both IT and IoT. And it inhibited them from billing, inhibited them from providing certain services. It really is crippling to a rural hospital. And the ripple effect that this has on a rural community is, it's hard to measure because it's so large. You have other types of healthcare organizations, dentist offices, eye doctors that also shut down because people migrate out of the community because they can't get the help that they need for their health. And this becomes a very large challenge, and we're very sensitive to it. So going through a little bit more on direct impact of the services within a hospital. So smaller systems, typically never a risk assessment is performed on their medical devices. So that's something that, again, we talked about a blind spot. It is a blind spot still, and it's predominant in rural hospitals. Patches are often not applied very frequently. There's no systematic way to approach them or to prioritize the work of patching. And a lot of times a patch isn't available, but there's no line of sight from the personnel within a rural hospital of a compensating control that might be approved by the OEM. So, small to mid-sized systems, healthcare IoT devices, they make up 75% of overall connected endpoints. That's by far the largest threat service within the hospital, and yet it's gone unattended for the most part. So some key takeaways on some of that information. HHS has put down voluntary requirements. Now, Scott Trevino, our SVP Vigilor here, he's up on the Hill a lot in DC, and he speaks to lawmakers on a regular basis to help educate them. There is encouraging information, though, because the voluntary requirements are starting to convert to actual law. And I think that's really the push that needs to happen in order to help healthcare systems that may be a little bit behind, help give them that incentive, the further incentive to push forward on this if it's something that hasn't been addressed. 43 states introduced legislation around cybersecurity in 2023. So, that number's, I think they're still figuring out the stats on 2024, but that's encouraging, right? So there's good news here. With rural hospitals, resources are thin. You wear a lot of hats. Even the CEO wears a lot of different hats, plays a lot of different roles. Sometimes the IT department is one individual. A lot of times maybe it's outsourced to an organization as well. And cybersecurity is a focus of legislation that is being worked on, but they still have the lack of resources and support. The law is not going to change how many folks they have working at the hospital. So, it's under-resourced cybersecurity in healthcare, period, particularly in rural areas. and it's an underinvestment area. So, it's really, it needs to be a pivot point. I see encouraging things where it's pivoting, and it's starting to be addressed, because I think even rural hospitals and smaller systems are realizing that an investment the money's got to be found somewhere, because they can't afford a breach. And it's not a matter of if, it's when and how bad. And that's just the reality of the environment, the threat environment we're in right now, and just the pervasiveness of these attacks. So, the challenge again, I mean, overall, the challenge is much greater for rural health. I think we can all agree. Um, so, and shutdown it's a much larger possibility for a rural hospital than it is for a larger system, of course, because it's just an economy of scale. So where do you start with addressing medical device cybersecurity? Well, you got to understand your current state, and that is kind of step one. But there's challenges that we understand, and often when we're engaged with organizations, we see silos between people, process, and technology, right? So we talked about some of the existing challenges in healthcare regarding talent shortage, but there still exists a significant gap between IT and clinical engineering or biomed person or folks that are repairing the medical devices, servicing the medical devices. But while they're doing this, cybersecurity hasn't traditionally been the focus while they're doing this other work. And to be candid, a lot of them are straight out doing the work they're doing if they're not outsourcing it or have a relatively decent sized team. And so, as far as cybersecurity knowledge, biomed folks, they don't get an education on it going through getting their degree to be in clinical engineering and have a biomed degree. It's a knowledge gap. And then IT traditionally has a knowledge gap around the biomedical world. And so we help bridge that gap. And that is very much around process. And so, I've seen significant gaps that continue to exist in process and governance, along with the remediation activities of these critical vulnerabilities. But step one is to identify what your threat profile, what your risk profile looks like. And then technology, I think we can all agree that, and it's understandable that rural hospitals, but healthcare in general, I think they're a little bit behind the tech curve, because it's you have a lot of hospitals that are operating in negative margin. And, we hope that that changes in the near future here. But, data gaps are common. And so you've got, an inventory system. Maybe you're using Excel, but, if you've got a CMMS system where you're putting your work orders in, things of that nature, on average, it's 63% inaccurate. And I know Aaron can attest to this with the organizations we've worked with, is that's pretty spot on. It's about somewhere around 60% or so, to round it off. So, there's challenges there. And so if you don't have an accurate inventory, it's kind of hard to identify your risk profile. And if you don't know what you need to fix, you're not going to know how to fix it. So, that's really where Vigilor comes in. But to give you a little bit of background, so, Vigilor is part of TriMedics. We service over 5,900 healthcare locations. And so, well, why do I mention that? Well, I think, for one, while it may be some credibility validation, really what I'm getting at is we've been collecting medical device data for over 3 decades. We've amassed a proprietary database of 5.64 million different devices, make, models, types, and we're currently managing 2.3 million. That covers, it says 90 to 95%. It's about 97% of what's out there in use today. And we're collecting attributes. We collect over 65, minimum 65 different data sources from these devices. So we know these things inside and out. We can tell you, if you do have a medical device security platform, it's going to tell you what potential vulnerabilities are. We can tell you actually if they're a vulnerability, and we get rid of that noise. So we have over 3,000 associates in the field biomed educations, been hands-on device for a long time, but they're also cross-trained in cybersecurity, and that's the uniqueness. And we service anything rural hospitals. We have special packaging and engagement models for them, which we see a high growth area for us, where you're at about 25 beds or so, and we service organizations that are in the 20,000 plus bed range. So I talked about people, processing, technology, and those silos. We help bridge that gap, and we practice what we preach. We follow the NIST framework, which is key, and that is a big part of how we run our processes. We look at data flow as well. We look at inventory, and like I said, we help clean up that inventory and really understand what is at that location. Is it accurate? And how do we clean that data up? Are you collecting enough information from the devices, right? So when they're on the wire. So regarding technology, we not only have the proprietary database, but we also have a proprietary security platform that we leverage as well. And then the people I mentioned, over 3,000 folks in the field, biomed folks, cross-trained in cybersecurity. That's something that, frankly, those two pieces are true unique areas for any organization out there that claims to do cybersecurity work in a medical device environment. So I talked about inventory reconciliation. We not only have process and people for that, but again, the technology to reconcile between your inventory. And again, if you do have a medical device security platform like a Cylera, whether it be Medigate, Armis as well, there's other players out there, of course, that you may be leveraging. That's picking up what's on the wire, and then your inventory is picking up really everything. And we try to reconcile those things and make sure there's accuracy. And that's really where that 40% or so, 35 to 40% inaccuracy, we get that cleaned up. In parallel, we start attacking known critical vulnerabilities that we identify, and we help prioritize that work. Now, the third piece is we do an overall assessment of your risk, and then we help build an action plan. And so that's the basic engagement model at the highest of levels in how we engage. So we typically, when we first start discussions and we get through, an overview of the organization, we make sure everybody's, all the stakeholders' questions are answered to understand really additional value that we bring in to show as an example, and I'll explain in a few more slides, how we prioritize work in more detail. A current state assessment is something that we do where it's not a super deep dive, but it absolutely gives you a really good picture into what does our risk profile look like at a higher level. How many critical vulnerabilities do we have that you know of? What is the match rate of device data? Right? Are we lacking device information where we can't, we've got to improve the inventory data, right? So we look at that, we provide insights into your inventory, and we also provide insights into, your known critical vulnerabilities. And we also identify, how we attack those. What is approved by the OEM? What is not approved by the OEM? It could be a patch, it could be a compensating control, or you may decide with IT that you want to take a different approach to air gap or segment the environment. Typically, it's not ideal for a rural hospital, though. So as a summary of what we do, I mentioned a current state assessment, rapid risk assessment. We provide the output and the value from that around prioritization of the remediations, compensating controls that are approved. We identify an area that there is no approved fix for that I mentioned before. There are several things that you can do there, and there's value there that we can provide, and I'll get to that in a second. We also provide integrations with technology. So your CMMS or inventory system, We can integrate that into our proprietary system and then also integrate into your medical device security platform if you have one. And, that's really where, our proprietary code does a lot of reconciliation right then and there. And so it gives you a pretty significant head start. We integrate with other technology platforms as well. And we can provide a SOC if you don't have one. And we also provide analytics and reporting. So informatics are part of our system and part of what we offer. So I mentioned the proprietary content library, just an immense amount of data in there. We also have data on known vulnerabilities, available and approved patches, work instructions. So again, your CMMS or inventory system, typically you're logging your work orders in there. And so known critical vulnerabilities, we are actually performing as a larger organization, TriMedics, over 1,100 work orders per month. If it's a known critical vulnerability and there is a fix, we know about it. So we help provide that information and expose you to that information where we've got work instructions already built. It's color by number. We make it very simple. Here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. If you want to do the work, we make it very straightforward. It also saves an immense amount of time because I know when I engage biomed folks, it's a one-off every time these work orders, and they take, in a lot of cases, hours to document. We've already got that planned out, what's approved, we give you the insight, and that'll help you go remediate. Or we can do the work for you, whatever you choose. And then the cyber action team. So one of the things we can offer as an additional service is, again, coming on site, doing CDI collection, helping you with remediation efforts, compensating controls that are approved by the OEM, and things of that nature. But we also have some leverage, and this is very unique as well, is TriMedics as a larger organization does things that Vigilor doesn't focus on, frankly, in clinical engineering. And that's where we've collected the data over such a long period of time. The break fix stuff, we are typically number 1 or number 2 parts buyer for medical device parts of organizations like GE, where they're number 2. We're a huge revenue stream for them. Well, what does that mean? It means we have some leverage. It means that if there isn't an approved fix for a device, even if it's aged quite a bit, 10, 15 years, we can lean into them to create a solution, a patch, a compensated control, etc. So this is actually a live customer. Unfortunately, I can't share who this is, but these numbers are fairly consistent within a ballpark of 5% or so. Typically, we'll walk into an environment, and in this case, I think it was around 40,000 devices or so. Their medical device security platform said, we have, this amount of potential critical vulnerabilities. So 40,000 devices, and we got rid of half that. So we got rid of half the environment, saying actually, because it's, say, on the certain operating system version 2 instead of version 1, it's safe. And so because of that detailed data we've been collecting for so long and the insight that we have, we can determine where the noise is. So that really reduces the environment. So that may be half the devices, but typically it's 90% of unique vulnerabilities, because you do have duplication of devices, device types, makes, models. They could be the same across, however many beds you have, and that's common. So so we get rid of half the device noise, about 90% of the overall critical vulnerability count. What's left? Well, again, we know what's an approved fix as far as patching. So we can identify that work. Again, we can coach or actually execute the work for you. Some of it can be done remotely as well. To apply this patching, we know it's approved. We have the documentation. If it's a known critical vulnerability with a patch, we have a work order for it. And that's a huge benefit. Like I said, it's not just, risk avoidance, it's also cost saving. We also are able to identify, 19% in this case of the environment. Typically, it's about 20% or so. I'd say 15 to 20% typically of the environment. We know there's approved compensating controls. Again, we've got the work orders built if it's known, and we've done the work, and those are available. And then what's left? That's your true risk. So in green, that's your true risk remaining, and it's typically 15 to 20%. That's common. That's actually 12 to 20% or so with the organizations I've worked with. So that's what you've got left. That's your risk. And that's where we can and have the capability to lean into these OEMs, depending on if it's a pump or something critical like that that you absolutely want to pay a lot of attention to. We can lean in and ensure there's a fix. And we understand too the average aging of a device continues to increase here over time. And obviously, depending on the economy, in the healthcare industry, also drives that a little bit. So let's say you've got a robust medical device, cybersecurity program in place already. There's an incident, there's a breach. What happens next? So really, it goes back to planning to properly deal with a breach. And so again, we follow this NIST framework, version 2, it's out now, 2.0. We follow this and we follow it tightly. And the areas that we influence are the cyber incident response plan. We're part of that. We're part of your overall landscape. And again, in the smaller hospitals and systems, we are a large majority of your endpoints. So we're the largest threat surface. And that in turn feeds up and is part of your information system contingency plan, your overall medical device environment and your IT environment, along with the response for that entirety of the environment as well. So the CIRP focuses breach mitigation and corrective action taken upon a cyber incident. And as mentioned in the previous slide, we help you build and document the CIRP in essence, as it relates to the medical devices. So your incident response plan basically assists you in helping you before, during, and after a breach in a nutshell. So some of the things that your plan should contain, obviously, what's your mission, strategy, and goals. You have to have things to measure, right? And you need executive buy-in, obviously. But you need to make sure also you have communication, and communication processes and workflows around if an incident occurs. And then measuring the capability and effectiveness of the response. You need to be able to measure how you responded to the incident as well to make sure you've got something contained, it's remediated, and you also have a modified go forward plan to ensure that doesn't repeat itself. But it's really about preventing it as a whole. And then how does this fit into those other plans that I showed you in the previous slide? So there's 4 key areas to the NIST incident response cycle that within this program that's been released by the federal government. Preparing and planning, obviously, we went through that. Detection and analysis, I can tell you, detection takes quite a long time. And as a combination of remediation, eradication, recovery, and identification, that's on average for healthcare organizations, 277 days. So that helps you understand a little bit of the cost, but the impact to the organization. And like I said, in a lot of cases, unfortunately, the rural hospitals, the smaller systems, and even larger ones, like if it's bad enough, like Prospect Health, they go bankrupt, they close the doors. And that's something we want to help you avoid. Benefits and outcomes of engaging Vigilor. So these are actually measured items, in which we've gathered from our customers. We've shown at least a 75% improvement. This is basement amount in the remediation time. So that 277 days, we help collapse that down tremendously. And again, if you have a plan in place, which we help ensure that is in place, that cuts down a lot of time as well. But it also ensures that you have measurable items and that you've eradicated the issue. We drastically reduced the $10 million average cost, that hard dollar cost, tremendously as well. And that is part of collapsing the identification, remediation, ratification process. 95% of the data collection accuracy also is improved. So this goes back to your inventory data. How accurate is it? Right? How much data are we collecting on it? And this is actually an internal KPI that we track very closely, because we want to make sure we get as close to 100% as possible. Understanding that things come on and offline, sometimes fairly frequently. We can provide real-time monitoring of available resources, and this greatly reduces the threat risk. And then documenting compliance and regulatory risks. So we help you be audit ready in essence. So if you got audited tomorrow, if you engage Vigilor, as far as your medical device environment, you'd be audit ready naturally. So that wraps up. I did decent on time. I think that wraps up what I had today. Please feel welcome to ask questions at this point.
Todd, I've got some questions. Can we go back to that earlier slide early on in the presentation that talked about the 60% of the items?
The inventory?
Yeah, the no patches. As we look at the fact of no patches available to protect it, are the OEMs engaged in looking at this, or are they just saying, well, this is what you got, don't worry about it, nothing's going to happen? 60% to me seems to be a big number that does not get a patch.
That is a big number. And, it does get cut down when they approve a compensating control. So that does collapse that 60% down a good amount, but you still have that percentage of risk for sure. And that's where we actually do have a feedback loop with the OEMs, because the other parts of our business as well, and it's fairly holistic. And we do push them to get a fix out for sure. Especially, there's a good amount of devices running Windows XP. And so
very valid point. That's the thing that people don't forget when we have the ruckus right now on Windows 10 to Windows 11. And do you have a decent enough computer system? A lot of our systems in our hospitals are still on the old XP programs.
Yep. Yeah, and we're very aware of that. And believe it or not, there's a good amount of patches available or compensated controls available for the XP environment. But we can work on a segmentation strategy if that's even desired. And that's where we also lean into that OEM, let them know, hey, this is important. Here's how many customers and devices we see out there that don't have a fix. You need to address this. So that's the value of that part of the program.
And then your next slide was talking about cyber insurance, I think, or was it one back? That one. When I guess as we look at the new rules that are on comment period right now on the whole upgrading of putting the burden on the hospital or the provider to be perfect in cybersecurity. And when you look at the long list, it could bankrupt you just trying to do that. So we need to assess what is achievable, what's obtainable. But to really do that, even huge, large systems, even when we look at the Fed getting hacked, can't probably meet this dream list that's coming up on us. So we need to have, as leaders of our organizations, to know we need to have a risk tolerance, but we also need to look at a plan. As we meet those plans on having our planning in place, we're doing multi-factor authentication, making everybody mad in your organization, and all the other steps. Is any of the insurance programs that are providing insurance, have you seen when there has been an incident that they just denied case by one technicality on the form that we're not going to cover you now because you didn't get this done in time? Have you seen any of that or talked to your other cybersecurity friends and other companies? Are insurance staying honest, or are they finding loopholes not to pay out on technicalities? Have you seen any of that?
Oh, that's a great question. And, I think insurance companies are infamous for rejections, right? Now, to my knowledge, I haven't seen anywhere if you didn't dot an I, cross a T, something minor in a form or form related. Typically, that's not the issue. The issue is if you don't have a plan, a documented plan, processes they follow, things of that nature, that's where, they look at things like that even when they are working with you to provide insurance coverage. And so we are working with insurance companies to try to get into some of these programs so that if you are leveraging a Vigilor, it brings down that premium quite a bit, right? And it also reduces the risk for the insurance company. So it's kind of all over risk that everybody shares that we greatly reduce. And to your point earlier, you're never going to be at 0% risk in your medical device environment or as a whole. But one of the things we factor into our risk score, we provide a risk score for your medical device environment, is what's important to the business, right? So business impact as well. And what's important to the business as far as where typically your patients, how you're serving them, what devices are used most frequently, what are most critical in your particular environment, things of that nature. And
The,
so I would say, just as a whole, as far as and again, I only know my small world, but they haven't been nitpicky to my knowledge at all. It's much more around preparedness and response and the ability to respond.
Well, and I know I'm the old guy who remembers that you used to have to take your EHR data off site every month to make sure you have a clean backup. And we've got lackadaisical with that with the cloud. But I forget if it was with the Ascension situation or another hospital, which again, I have not been in how the new technologies are being set up. But I think it was either a linear accelerator or another cancer treatment device that the device doesn't allow the software to set on site. It's in a cloud being SAS. One of the practices that after I read that, and I've got you online because that's a connection of the Internet of Things, is there a strategy as you look at all these companies that are proprietary wanting to have the software as a software as a service offsite, even though you spent $15 million for the equipment? Should you go ahead and segregate that out of your system and have a direct only? And again, I know we like to interface everything later, but is there some steps that, again, as we look at the future with everything going to cloud based, how to get another level of protection by maybe separating out some of those with a different interconnect and a different firewall in front of it? Or is that something that we should start looking at, that fact that all of our OEMs, they're kind of like John Deere Company. They don't want anybody to fix their stuff except themselves and charge you high money. I'm just thinking out loud, is some of those techniques that we got, because remember, in the day, back in the day, oh, we'll just plug this in. We got a switch over here. We plug this in over here. We don't really care. We're just bringing everything together. Shouldn't we have a real big philosophy of looking at how do we break out some of our high risk and high tech services and maybe a separate network within the network? Or is that some of the practices we should be considering?
So the geek side of me is going to answer this because this isn't really an area with Vigilor's focus, but because of the nature of the medical device environment. But we obviously talk the whole gamut with hospitals and systems, healthcare systems. And so what I see is cloud is growing. It's growing in every size organization within healthcare for sure. It's here, and it is a different approach to protect for sure. And it's starting to get addressed. I would say it's a concern. It's a concern for a lot of organizations. And frankly, the cost of ownership typically tends to be less when you look at the whole gamut if you go to cloud versus on-premise software traditionally. So it's particularly attractive with smaller hospitals. So, but it is top of mind, and I would say, the way it's addressed is, in my opinion, this is all my opinion because Vigilord doesn't focus on this, is it needs to mature. The
Yeah.
approach needs to mature.
Well, I could spend hours talking about this because as back in my history, we did our own county fiber optic network, and I learned a lot about fiber technology and how things are done. And connectivity, we're still down to the issue is how do we protect our connectivity from people stealing your information, and how do you look at the pathway that technology goes. And I really appreciate the fact that Vigilor is looking at the Internet of Things, not just everything that's a Windows based or an Apple based operating system. And people forget there's a lot of things that we hook up to our networks that we should be leery of because you never know when a person of ill intent come in with an HVAC a service unit on and walk up to a unit, plug in, and could always put a virus or something into the network with some ill will to the organization. So I appreciate the fact that you guys concentrate on the Internet of Things and the items that most people have forgotten that there is risk.
Yeah, and
So
the one thing I want to mention too, and this is, I mentioned Scott Trevino, who unfortunately couldn't make today, but he's got a pretty heavy background in medical device product development, and I actually have a very heavy background in product development as a whole. Ideation, design, all the way through manufacturing and end of life. And the push is to have these OEMs be designing these medical devices with cybersecurity in mind. That's where we need to be. I
yes.
think we've taken some baby steps, but we need a lot more advancement there to help hospitals and healthcare systems because really the burden right now, for the most part, is on the entity. It's not on the OEM.
Correct. And again, what really worries me that we're probably this close away is I had a long conversation with a person that's working in quantum computing. And when you start looking at our encryption, and in theory, even for our encryption in Bitcoin and some of the other cyber computing with the quantum services and the ability to run millions of transactions, that's going to increase our vigilance that we're going to have because there's no perfect password, there's no perfect block, there's no perfect firewall. It's constant monitoring, and partnering with a company like you is very important for organizations with staffs of one.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and it's like you're saying, it's an economy of scale. It's much more difficult for smaller hospitals for sure. Uh, and the one thing I'll mention, sorry, my train of thought a little bit. Anyways, I'll wrap it up there. Any other questions, Dennis, or anybody else?
No, well, I just want to say for all the folks that are online today, I know I always have questions because this is one important passion of mine to make sure we're protecting our data, our patients, and because again, cybersecurity is quality of care.
Yeah.
So Todd, thank you, Aaron, and team. I really appreciate all of you being on the call today, and
Dennis, if
look
I
forward
could,
to partnering.
I'm sorry. I was just going to add. I remembered what I was getting at. I apologize for interrupting you, Dennis,
No,
and wrapping things up. But just the thing that we also see, just to wrap up on this topic, is uh, AI is being leveraged in very good ways in all size hospitals for efficiencies, but it also is being leveraged by the bad guys, and that is kind of the next tier of, I would say, threat efficiency. And covering tracks and learning from block pathways, things of that nature.
well, again, Todd, team, Stacy, Aaron, everybody, I appreciate working with you. And
Thanks for the
again,
opportunity.
look forward to many years of protecting our members and across the two states and make sure that we're delivering high quality care and protecting the community's best interests. So thank you. And anybody needs any information on this, just contact any of the APS team and we'll get you connected to the Vigilor team. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.